Okay, thank you very much. I want to, first of all, thank everybody for being here. What a great crowd. Somebody commented in the back to be going up against the Vikings and have a full crowd like this is quite a testament. I guess it says something about DVRs. But anyway, it really is a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Debate Minnesota. I want to thank MSU Mankato for hosting this event. I think this is what it should be. This is what we should be doing as a citizen government, as a nation that prides ourselves on electing people from amongst ourselves and going and being part of decision-making as we make the decisions and decide on the rules that we live within. I think tonight you're going to have an opportunity to see a distinct difference in candidates, a distinct difference in thinking. And quite frankly, you're going to have an opportunity to think about what it is that you want our country to be, what direction you want our country to go. And you're going to hear differences in thinking and differences in ideas, and maybe even differences in approaches as to the way we attack the issues or not. So I guess what I'm thinking is what we're doing here is what we should be doing as a country, what we should be doing as citizens of southern Minnesota here in the 1st District. And hopefully this is going on around the country as we pick the next group of people that are sent to Washington, in this case, to represent us and to help make decisions about how we shape this nation and how we live together as a country, as the great United States of America. So thanks again for being here. I really look forward to the discourse.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Reminder, no clapping. I have to be the clap police here, so bear with me. Mr. Wilson, I believe it's your turn.
Very good. Thank you. Well, thank you for being here tonight. It is a great night to be out and about, and I really appreciated the comments relative to Lincoln-Douglas debate and bringing that type of style into this evening. I want to start off by saying that when we started our campaign early this year, we brought people together from across our district, and we brought them into one room, and we asked them, what is it that you want to see from a candidate? And the answer was very clear. Stop the games and do the work. Very consistent with the style that we've chosen tonight through Debate Minnesota. And so I'm happy to report back to you as a candidate that along those lines of stopping the games and doing the work, I do not take money from special interest groups. I'm the only endorsed candidate that does not use negative campaign ads. And I'm the only candidate that has provided 10 specific solutions on my website. And that website is stephenwilson.org, and I just encourage you to take a look at it so you can see some of those solutions coming from you, people right here in southern Minnesota. Let me give you a quick vision for the United States. We'll jump right in. I think the vision for America really needs to be focusing on energy independence, something that people on the left and the right can get excited about. We've had enough issues over the last couple of years that have polarized America. Now it's time to bring us together with some ideas. What about energy independence? What about having a vision for looking out 20 years and saying in 20 years from now, we are going to be energy independent from the Middle East? And so if we pass legislation next year that said that we're going to gradually turn off the spigot of Middle Eastern oil, the next month we would start to create jobs in America. We would start to create more innovation in America. We would have conservation in America, and I'm excited to move in that direction and see what we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Walz.
Thank you, Joe and Pete. Thank you to Debate Minnesota and the Student Association. Thank you to my beautiful wife, Gwen, best partner and advisor I could hope for, and my father-in-law for coming. That ought to say something. I appreciate that. But thank you to each of you for being here. Randy's right about this. There's many places you could be. It's a beautiful day, and we know we're living on borrowed time, but you chose to be here. With all the rights and privileges and blessings this great country gives us, it also comes with responsibilities, and that's partaking in the democracy. And while it becomes very frustrating at times, in fact, Churchill was right when he said this is the worst way to govern possible, except for every other that's been tried. And that's the challenge that we're up against. I've approached this job the way I've approached my life and reflective on you. I've done it with passion and vision, much like Dan and Angie Bastian over at Angie's Kettle Corn, starting out in their garage and building a business, hiring 100 people in a recession and giving back to their community. I've done it with hard work and a belief in the American workers, much like Peerless Chain, the #1 producer of chain in North America, still being produced in Winona. Founded by veterans after World War I, working with me to figure out how we hire this newest group of veterans, stamp that chain with Made in America and ship it to China. Not jobs, but products. And I've done it with a patriotism and a love of country reflective of Mike Troke from Wabasha. This is a man who, as a young man, was sent to the rice fields of Vietnam, exposed to Agent Orange, came home and is now suffering with Parkinson's, but came back and worked with us together to make sure that this country fulfills its obligation to Mike. That's what this job's about. That's what reflecting of your representative is. It's to be the best that you have to offer and put that in Washington to reflect this nation's values. I'm honored to be with you here today, and we gather in this common room, this community room, not as independents, not as Republicans, not as Democrats, but Americans that have differences of opinion. That's the beauty of this country. But we have solutions to problems that we have to find. We have to find those solutions. It's dependent on us for the next generation. This country was given to us. We need to give it in better shape. So I look forward to tonight's discussion and moving us that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. We now will go to the first question. Per our rotation, we will start with Mr. Wilson. The question is, what needs to be changed with the current...
Randy was first.
Mr. Demmer got the opening statement, so then I think we, as I understand it, we then...
I believe that's right. We rotate back and forth.
Mary, if we're wrong, tell somebody to speak into...
I'm not only the
Somebody else
clap
the first
police,
chance.
I'm the take your turn police. Mr. Wilson, what needs to be changed with the current health care reform law, if anything? How would you go about influencing that change? Are there parts that should be kept in regardless? Could it be tweaked?
Well,
I think
a lot
that's a four-part, one question.
Four-part, one question. A lot of people were hoping that we'd be done with this debate, but we're continuing on with the health care, and for really good reason. The original objective, if we look at it, was affordable health care for everyone. But the challenge with what occurred in the end is we got to the everyone part, but we seemed to skip over the affordable part. Really, that is the most important part, because that does affect everyone. If we can reduce the cost of health care as a whole for America, that's important. We didn't get that done. So for that reason, I would be in favor of actually repealing that and just focusing on efficiencies first. Efficiencies that would decrease the cost of health care. Now, keep in mind that in the 60s, the cost of health care was 5% of our GDP. Now, it's somewhere between 16 and 17% of our GDP, on the way to possibly 17.5, 18, 19.5. That's not the direction we should be going. We have absolutely got to come up with a bill that's going to focus just on efficiencies first. Let me tell you a quick story. I learned this the hard way. I spent 20 years in business development. I spent 10 years putting financials together, projections. And one day, when I was a rookie, first doing this, I put together a budget for a business that wanted to expand and borrow $1 million. But their existing business was inefficient and wasn't making money. I went ahead and put the plan together. I spent their money to do it. And the banker looked at it, took my hand, walked out to the farm. It was a middle-sized farm. And we had to explain to him together that expanding a business that's inefficient and not profitable is only going to get you more of the same after you expand. And I believe it's the same with the federal government. We have absolutely got to figure out how to increase efficiencies first, and then we'll have the discussion about expansion.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Walz, it's your turn.
Well, first of all, I'm proud of the work that we did, taking something that is as important as health care, making sure that Dick and Sheila Weiser, no one will have to go through what they went through as their son was denied health care and died of a pre-existing condition when he was denied access to a hospital in Las Vegas. Those are the things that needed to change first and foremost. Also, spending twice as much as any other industrialized nation in the world and having outcomes that rank 37th before Lithuania. That's unacceptable. The solution sets right amongst us. The solution sets at the Mayo Clinic, Gunderson Lutheran, ISJ right here. So I went out and did what a representative's supposed to do. I listened to them and incorporated the best that we could do, making sure we pay for value over volume, making sure we're not incentivizing waste, fraud, and abuse in a Medicare system that so many people depend on, making sure that we moved forward with a bill that was a compromise. That's the thing that's missing in this country. It's compromise, compromise, compromise. Yet I see a poll that says most people see that as a weakness. If you want to build a caucus that share the beliefs of exactly like you, you're going to find yourself alone at some point. This nation has to come together to get those things. The Mayo Clinic said this was a wonderful first step in this. Dave Durenberger, when Senator Durenberger, a Republican senator, came out and endorsed me because of my work on health care and said the most significant changes to reducing the cost of health care were put in by our representative from southern Minnesota on the Mayo model, Dave Durenberger said something very, very wise. Health care reform is not a destination, it's a journey. And we will always be moving things forward, and we can do that. The IOM study that will come out, start to bring costs down, start to make sure people are included, start to make sure that we're not going to have to worry about whether you pay your mortgage payment or whether you take your child in for an earache that might develop into something worse. This nation can do better, we can deliver it more efficiency, and it can be a truly American model that does what it's supposed to do while reining in costs and fixing national deficits caused by health care.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Demmer.
Well, thank you. Well, here's the first big change that we have. Here's the first big differences that we see. I do not support this health care program. I do not support what was passed in Washington. I have to contrast with the congressman in terms of whether there was real listening going on in terms of what people wanted to hear, what they wanted to see. What people were saying is they wanted to see change. They wanted to see some control of their health care. They wanted to see some way that costs would get reined in. What we have in this particular health care bill is we have something, number one, that is being paid for in a very false way. We were told this is being paid for. How is it being paid for? $500 billion being cut out of Medicare. $500 billion, that's with a B. Number two, we have cuts to doctors. Every year we have a 21% cut to doctors in our reimbursement system that's scheduled to happen, and each year we have the Congress come in and does what's called the doc fix. It's a huge part of the cost of this to say that this is being paid for by not doing the doc fix. I can tell you that Mayo Clinic is not in favor of not doing the doc fix, and that is pushing over probably a third of the cost of this program is being paid for supposedly by not doing the doc fix. Catastrophic. We are trying to get providers to come to rural Minnesota, to southern Minnesota, to come to some of the best healthcare institutions we have. To say that we're going to cut providers by 21% to help pay for this? Not acceptable. Not acceptable to take $500 billion out of the Medicare program that affects seniors, that affects people who are disabled. Not acceptable. Also not acceptable is to think that this somehow is driving reform in terms of how we act and how we do medicine, how we take care of ourselves. There is nothing in this health care bill that would drive us to more healthy living lifestyles. There is nothing in this bill that would drive us toward finding ways to take better care of ourselves so that we don't overaccess, we don't overuse. It's wrong, it has the wrong people in control of it, and it needs to be repealed.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Mr. Wilson, you have a 1-minute response.
Well, let's look at some of the numbers relative to what this health care cost is about. We're going to save $138 billion over the course of the next 10 years. But if we put that in perspective, we've got a government that is on an unsustainable course financially. And that, in the largest part, is due to the rising cost of health care relative to Medicare. So that $138 billion, let's put that in perspective. That's less than 3% of the overall cuts that we're going to need, or changes we're going to need to make in the deficits in the next 7 to 8 years. So it doesn't really address that. Matter of fact, if you look at some of the most recent data, you can look it up in Health Issues magazine, it shows that over the course of the next 10 years, with the new health care reforms, the overall cost of health in the United States will be 0.3% more as a share of the GDP than if we would have passed nothing at all.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Walz, you have a 1-minute response.
Well, I found something I agree with Representative Demmer on. You're going to find a distinct difference between us. This is what happens when you get talking points from the National Republican Party versus listening to the Mayo Clinic. This is the clear difference in this. Mr. Demmer's talking points when he talks about this, I find it really, really interesting. The cuts he talks about Medicare, whatever. Are you for fraud, waste, and abuse, Randy? Because that's what you're saying in this. The Mayo Clinic estimates it could be as much as $600 billion a year in this. That's why in Texas, if you go in, we pay $17,000 a year for a patient. They get worse outcomes than at Mayo, where we pay $6,000 a year and get better outcomes. That's incentivizing healthy care, making sure this bill allows now for Medicare to pay for, oh, gosh forbid, for prevention of diabetes instead of treating it. The way Randy wants to advocate for, that $500 billion goes in to paying for chronic care. It pays for amputating a leg, it pays for amputating the wrong leg. Why would we not want to prevent the diabetes in the first place and move forward? This stretched out Medicare solvency by 13 years. Steve Wilson's right about this, though. The real driver in the long-term economic debt of this country is health care costs. That's why this bill took the courageous first step. And when they tell you that they're going to repeal and replace it, they didn't do anything for 75 years. Tomorrow they're going to.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Demmer, you have 1 minute response, sir.
Well, the truth is, the last 4 years, Congressman Walz and the Democrats have been in control, and they've done nothing. Done nothing about health care whatsoever.
Passed the bill.
And yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yes, we did have.
We would ask the audience, please, per our rules, to remain quiet, no clapping, no laughing, really.
We did pass a bill against the wishes of the American people and the people that live in this district. It's about taking control from people in their health care. It's about saying that an employer, you are now responsible for your employees' health care. You're responsible. Congressman Walz, you wouldn't know that. You've never been an employer. You've never been responsible to invest and to have a business. So you wouldn't know about giving that responsibility.
No clapping, please.
Congressman Walz, this is about who's got control of my health care, me, or do I make me as an employer responsible for going out and making sure how my employees live, not just in the workplace but at home. This is about people making their own choices. That's what this is about. And it's false that we say you're going to pay for it by taking it out of Medicare. You know it's false because the doc fix is something that's going to happen again, and we're going to have to find other ways to raise this money. It's not right what you did. It's not what you're hearing. It's not something the Mayo Clinic supports. They think a step in the right direction. Nothing about the word wonderful was ever in there. They said it's a step in direction of change, and it is. But it's not the right step. And it's also a step toward destroying as far as what Mayo is concerned, which is single-payer government run. That's what you're after.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Time is up. We move on to the next question, which is also about health care, so we should be able to continue this lively debate, I'm sure. And the first question, Mr. Walz goes first this time. But the question is, part of the health care law, the 1099 tax compliance idea, looks like it won't work, or at least is very unpopular. Removing it would take $15 billion off the $100 billion savings they say the law was supposed to reduce the deficit by. The question is, how confident are you about the idea that the health care law will still reduce the deficit by any amount?
Well, first of all, I think it's dependent on if we get the implementation of the IOM study. If the folks are allowed to repeal this thing, it absolutely won't. And then what you can be guaranteed, this is the issue here of the fantasy world, that you're going to be given charge of your health care. No, you weren't. The health insurances, they denied you care. It's called pre-existing conditions. They're the ones that made the decision for you. Now they cannot do that. Now it's private doctors, private hospitals, private insurance. As the Mayo Clinic did say, the largest expansion of private insurance. This week they added millions to that. So if millions of people now can go to the Mayo Clinic. So Chicken Little sky falling did not happen. We're expanding private insurance to the greatest institution in the country. On the issue of changing this, the 1099 was absolutely wrong. You're absolutely right, and we needed to get the fix on that. That's why it was brought to the House floor. That's why the Chamber of Commerce originally told me, and I heard it from small businesses, you got to get rid of this 1099 requirement that every expense of $600 is filled. I said, you're absolutely right. That's a bad piece of legislation. We brought it to the floor. I voted yes. The Chamber of Commerce found out that would actually be cooperating, something that doesn't happen in Congress, so all the Republicans voted against it, the very ones who wanted to. It was a straight-up yes or no vote. All it took was yes or no. Nothing was added to it. It was pure, do we repeal this 1099 requirement? They did not do that. That's because you're getting this argument that somehow there's been cooperation in this. This bill, as Dave Durenberger said, was written by Republicans in 1993 as a response to the Clinton health care plan. It was bipartisan. He said it's the biggest piece of bipartisan legislation that's ever been constructed in this country. Saying that there wasn't time to do it, it was the most discussed, most debated, most hearings ever held on a piece of legislation. The public out here, and to say we haven't listened, the market does work on some things. When the Post-Bulletin did a story, you know what they said? The largest contributors to my campaign are Mayo Clinic employees. If it were so bad, I would think they would be flooding you money. But no, that comes from Washington in the form of the Republican National Committee. So there is a difference between us.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Demmer, you get to go second.
Well, thank you. And the differences will continue to come out. The only thing bipartisan of this bill is the bipartisanness in trying to repeal it when we get back and try to make this change. That will be a bipartisan vote. The passage of this was not bipartisan. The 1099 issue is a classic example of the problems we have with this particular bill, Congressman. The truth of the matter is you didn't know what was in it to begin with because it came too fast. The leadership that you support tried to ram this thing through. They made change at the last minute to try to solve some questions for some people that wanted to have some change. And we know that there were changes made. This has not only the 1099 issue, we have the federal government taking over college loans, Congressman. We have sales tax on the sale of homes and sale of businesses. We have now an income tax on capital gains to help with this sort of thing. And we have commissions all over the place that are going to be establishing rules that we don't even know is going to bring. We got businesses that are refusing and just afraid to go forward and expand and hire people because they know what a disaster this is going to be. They know what a scourge this is going to be on them trying to bring jobs to this country. Because we're setting up a situation where whether it's the income taxes that you want to raise, or whether it's the health care tax that you want to put into place, whether it's the cap and trade, it's all about setting up an environment where people cannot hire people and have jobs. And that's what this is about, and the 1099 issue is a classic example of why this doesn't work, because we didn't know what was in to begin with. As the Speaker said, we'll get it passed so we can figure out what's in it. And I think it's just wrong that it was done that way. It's not the way we're supposed to be doing things. That's not the way we do it in the Minnesota legislature. We have committee hearings, we study these things out, and then we get it done. You didn't do that in the Congress, and it's unfortunate. And that's not the kind of representation that we should be having in Washington from southern Minnesota, and it's not the way our federal government should be operated. And this is an example of it, and it's a big, big deal because it affects every single person that's here. It affects our economy, and it affects how we are as Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Mr. Wilson, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I'm sure everybody's seeing this, right? There's a lot of activity. I think the Vikings game probably would have been boring tonight compared to this. I hope that it's becoming evident as we go through the evening why it's important to have independence in Congress. Because really, the worst decision that could happen relative to the cost that was pointed out is no decision at all. That would be the worst decision that could happen to this nation over the next 2 years. And you can take a look at what's happened already tonight. We're only a few minutes into it. And ask yourself the question, do you think that if a decision had to be made tonight, that we could get that done with the two people sitting next to me at this table? This is serious business. We've got to have some type of mediation, if you want to call it. Whatever it is, we've got to have some voice of reason, some people in the middle to be able to figure out how we can get this nation moving forward. And that's why I've spent the last year bringing Republicans and Democrats together in the same room and formulating ideas, 10 new ideas that both sides had input on. It can be done. I don't know if it can be done here tonight, but it can be done, and I've demonstrated that. So yes, we do need to be very careful about the cost going forward. I kind of already answered that question earlier about the importance of that. So I just wanted to point out that part of it is getting that price, that amount as a share of our GDP to go down, but we're not going to get there unless we have some type of cooperation in the system, in Congress going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Walz, you have a 1-minute response.
Well, I wanted to, a couple things, be very clear about this. 50 million people, up to 80 million per year without insurance. The idea of creating jobs. And Randy said, well, I've never created jobs, which, like many things, is false. And Randy, you mentioned that campaigns are like small businesses. You've run yours at a debt for 4 years. Do you provide health insurance for your campaign people? Do you provide the health insurance for your campaign staff? I do. So it is paid for, and so I know how it goes there. So the other thing we would have is that if you're going to make the decision that we're going to repeal, if we're going to have the idea that you're going to not address the issue of the spiraling cost, Mayo Clinic saying they cannot sustain at the status quo. The other thing you're going to have to be realizing is, and I've seen some audacious things in my life or whatever, but what you're asking for, and I think to a certain extent Steve's asking for this too, but Randy's being very clear about it, walk right down the aisle there to Laura Asklin and rip the insurance card out of her child's hand that she has now. That's what you're asking for. That's the thing that goes forward. We've made a good decision in this country. We've moved forward. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to continue to be reassessing, but we've made a step forward. That's where Steve's talking about, get some things done.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Demmer, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. Well, again, it's sometimes not what you do, it's how you get there. And the process for passing this particular bill was flawed. And that's why we ended up with a bad piece of legislation. 2,700 pages. The people who passed it did not know what was in it, had no clue, and there's all kinds of agencies that are set up that are going to balloon government, that are going to increase costs, and that are going to be doing rulemaking that are going to impose upon us, every single one of us, and employers, the kind of overarching control that we don't look for in our government. We don't want government coming in, Congressman, and ruling how we do things in our businesses. We don't want government coming in and ruling how we do things in our personal lives. We can make choices. We are capable. This bill is assuming that people can't make choices about their own health care. It's assuming that businesses have to be coerced into providing health care, which is not true. And it's also built on a false premise of how it's going to be paid for. It's false right down the line. It's got things in here that have nothing to do with health care, and it's just not good for the country. Do we need health care update? Yes, we do, but not this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Mr. Wilson, you have 1 minute.
Very good. Well, let's demonstrate how this works. If you're going to create relationships and move things forward, it starts with establishing what it is that you agree upon first. So, what do I agree upon with the current health care bill? I agree with the idea of allowing people to stay on health care under their parents' insurance policy until they're 26. I think it's a good idea. We've got 2 kids in college. I understand it. I also understand the idea of pre-existing conditions. You see, before I went to Iraq, I spent a year there as a civilian, as a United States diplomat embedded in the Army. Before I went there, I went through a series of tests for pre-existing condition with my eyes. I was born with a vision impairment. So we did a bunch of tests on that. We wanted to make sure I was good to go to Iraq. I went to Iraq. I was good to go. I went to Iraq. I came back, and then I went through a process of applying for private insurance. Guess what? I was denied because of some of the results of the tests that I did to go to Iraq. So I did not have insurance. My wife went back to work so that we could get insurance for our family. So I'm empathetic and I understand the nature of these situations.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. With that, we move on to the next question. Pete?
The second major area that we want to address in tonight's debate is the federal budget deficit and the U.S. economy. The first question in that area, the deficit is about $1.2 trillion. That's about 3 times what it was before President Obama and Democrats took office in 2008. How much responsibility should the party in power take for the deficit? What needs to be done? And when is the time to start making inroads to reduce the deficit? And I believe the first response on this goes to Mr. Demmer.
Well, thank you. Well, the federal budget deficit, the massive buildup in debt that we've seen at astronomically historical levels is quite frankly one of the most ominous things that's happened to this country since its founding. We know in the past 4 years, since Congressman Walz has taken office, that we have seen more debt, bigger deficits ongoing than we've seen in the entire history of the United States. Congress passes the laws controlled by the Democrats both in Congress and in the Senate in that 4 years. Absolutely amazing that we now have the attitude, the people who are in Congress, who are in control, have the attitude that if we just throw more government money at a problem, somehow it'll get taken care of. The one piece that's forgotten about that is, number one, the government does not create wealth. The government does not create the kind of income that causes our country to thrive and to grow and to be vibrant. And the second piece missing from this is it has to be paid for. It has to be paid for by the taxpayers of this country. And the taxpayers of this country are overwhelmingly at disadvantage in trying to come up with ways that we can pay for this. If we continue going down the path, we got children and grandchildren that aren't even born yet that have thousands of dollars on their head that they're going to be responsible for paying for this sort of thing. When I was in business, 30 years in business, I could not go and get a loan, and I borrowed lots of money as I built and grew my businesses and invested my own private capital. I could not go and borrow money if I didn't have a plan to pay it back ahead of time because it's irresponsible. And you planned ahead and you had what the result was going to be at the end to go forward. Congressman, you guys had no idea how this is going to work. And in fact, you kicked down the road until December, even putting a budget resolution together. First time in almost 40 years, we haven't had a budget resolution as to how we're going to go forward and do things in Congress, how we're going to pay for things. It's totally irresponsible.
Mr. Wilson.
Well, let's just cut through all this rhetoric. Let's just answer the question and give some actual facts. First of all, you asked 4 parts of that question. The first one was relative to the $1.2 trillion. Let's just clarify that a little further. That's just the debt held by the public. There's more debt out there that we don't seem to talk about, and that is that the intergovernmental debt, that we borrow from ourselves, from Social Security and Medicare, we need to include that, and then it would be a whole lot higher, like 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. So let's just be real transparent about that. Secondly, the party in place. Both parties deserve to take responsibility, because both of them had a stake in that, okay? This is something that's been going on for 20 years, that we've become addicted to debt as a nation. We're all responsible, whether it was the Medicare Part D or some of the things with the Keynesian macroeconomics of the stimulus package. Everybody needs to accept blame. There's plenty of it to go around. What needs to be done? We need a debt limit set by the year for the year 2018, a credit card limit, so that by the year 2018, we have gotten back to a sustainable path as a nation. That means that 60%, we have to get down to the point where 60% of our debt held by the public is the debt limit as a share of the GDP. That's what we need to get to. And the last question was, what's the time to start moving in that direction? Absolutely now. We have to set that limit now so that we've got enough time for that glide path to get from where we are today to a sustainable path by 2018. But the time is now.
Mr. Walz.
Well, again, and I appreciate Steve brings good points in this, and both sides in accepting some responsibility. Unlike a revisionist history, the debt didn't start on January 21st, 2009. A $3 trillion war, not a word from Mr. Demmer. Medicare Part D, $800 billion unpaid for, passed in the middle of the night after being left open 3 hours. Tax cuts for the wealthiest 2% of Americans that did not create a job but ballooned the debt and the deficit. We faced an economic crisis not seen since the Great Depression. So you would have known, I said, I feel like I'm debating. We know what Hubert Hoover would have done, and that's what Randy Demmer would have done, nothing, and led towards the Great Depression. We had to take decisive action, and that's deficit. But I agree with Steve on this. His answers that he's coming up with are coming from the Concord Coalition and some of those folks, and I think they're right on this. 2018 was 60% of the GDP as a long or medium range trying to get handle on the debt. But the real issue here is that you're going to, if you don't grow the economy, if you just figure out how to get this tax cut to the top 2% or whatever, grow the economy and grow new jobs on this. And I find it interesting. Government can't do anything in this. This needs to be clearly pointed out. There's going to be an issue here. Mr. Demmer takes that he thinks we shouldn't have done any Wall Street reforms. We shouldn't have done those types of things. Doesn't believe government should have done anything. These people have the right to know, Randy. You took $500,000 from the government. Shocked me too. $500,000. $75,000 in farm subsidies, and then you take, while you're supposed to be voting, you said get the job done. The House of Representatives in Minnesota is in session, voting on bills. You go to Washington, meet with Karl Rove to figure out how to run against me, and you take per diem payments from the taxpayers right out here. That's how government grows. That's how deficit grows. The stimulus and things created jobs right here. There's teachers in this room working. There's firefighters in this room that still are in the firehouse. There's police officers here, and Highway 14 is moving forward. We can do this together. We can have an honest discussion on it. I agree with much of what Steve's saying. Get the short-term deficit. Look for the long-range solutions to try and curb that long-range debt, but grow the economy by getting back to made in America and creating the jobs here.
Please, we ask that you refrain from applause. Each of you now gets a 1-minute response on the question about the deficit, and we go first to Mr. Demmer.
Thank you. $787 billion of so-called stimulus. Congressman, we don't even know where the money's going. We don't know where it went. And quite frankly, from my understanding, $1.6 billion of that went straight overseas to China that you voted for to help with job creation over there. And you talk about not sending jobs overseas, and here you are supporting it and putting stimulus money to it. Maybe you didn't know that, because a lot of things you don't know as you're voting and as you're working in Congress. But the bottom line is, here's another thing. You like to talk about pay-go. The only time we don't do pay-go is when there's an emergency. Every single bill that's been passing has been emergency. We are building up debt to a massive degree. You know, it's a very basic principle. When you need to expand your business, you can borrow money, you can grow what you have to do, and you can invest, but you have to have a way to pay for it. There is no concept here of how to pay for it. There's no plan put in place to how to pay for it, and it simply can't work because government does not create wealth. Government creates an infrastructure within which people create wealth and job creation. And by putting this kind of burden on our businesses, I've been talking to businesses all across this district who are very, very concerned about whether or not they should invest or not. They can invest, but they won't because of what this bill and because of what your policies, the stimulus, the cap and trade,
Mr. Demmer, I think we have to...
Are we going to stop? Oh, I'm sorry. No, like 30 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw the stop sign. My apology. I'm very...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I thought thing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I thought I saw the stop sign.
Sorry.
Mr. Wilson, a 1 minute response.
Sorry.
Well, I'm glad that Randy brought up the idea of having a plan, because we do need to have a plan. And I guess I would check to find out who has the plan of the three of us for moving this nation forward. If you go to my, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little redundant. I'll apologize ahead of time, because this is so important. We do have to have a plan. We can't just talk about this. I am the candidate that has 10 specific solutions on my website that focuses on solutions from citizens, and the title of it is 10 New Ideas for Stabilizing the Debt and Moving the Economy Forward. I've got a copy of it here. We've got them available afterwards. It sounds like a movie star or something, or a singer, but we've got them on our website for free. And it is so important, and I challenge anybody to look at the candidates who have ideas to move forward, because we're not going to have much time when we get into Congress to be able to make these decisions that have to be made right now. Because on December 1st is when that Fiscal Debt Commission brings their information forward publicly, and we've got to be ready.
A 1 minute response from Mr. Walz.
Well, Representative Demmer said that I don't know much. What I do know is I got a 4-year-old, and when he calls himself Batman, it doesn't make him so. So when you call yourself fiscally conservative, it certainly does not make you so, just because you're saying it. The Stimulus Act created 3.3 million jobs. Randy was visiting a manufacturer here in Mankato last week in the Mankato Free Press with Randy's visit with John Klein, who voted for the Wall Street bailout. Randy really wishes I would have voted for that so he could come back and tell you, because that's on his talking points, but I didn't do it, and I didn't vote for the auto bailout. What I did vote for is the largest tax cuts to working Americans. 98% of you got a tax cut on this. That was a third of the stimulus bill. It's been shown that it's the absolute most transparent piece of regulation or things that have been put out there. It created jobs. It kept teachers working. But Randy says to me this, and he says to many of you, teachers aren't real jobs. These aren't real jobs. They don't mean anything. Firefighters aren't real jobs. Police aren't real jobs. Those aren't the things that matter. Those are the things that build our society. Those are the things that create the wealth by creating the capacity in this country to move us forward. Those are the things that the stimulus bill deal, and to say it's absolutely false. The jobs going overseas, patently false, and we'll prove it to anyone who wants to ask. Patently false ad. Patently false.
The second question in regard to the federal budget deficit. What would you do about Social Security and Medicare with regard to the deficit? And the first 2 minute response here goes to Mr. Wilson.
Okay, you give me the easy one. That's good. All right. Social Security. Are we ready? Social Security is one that we can fix. And we just have to all put on our thinking of that we're going to have shared sacrifice, that we're all going to give a little, and we can get it done tonight if we wanted to. Okay, there's 3 different groups of people that are affected by Social Security. 1, the group that are paying in. 2nd, the ones that are ready to retire. And 3rd, the ones that are receiving benefits. If we make some adjustment, let's go back to the first one, those that are paying in. They currently are capped on the amount that is taken out of their paycheck at $107,000. If we would allow that to go a little bit higher, then we could bring more revenue in. If we looked at the second group, those that are retiring, if we adjusted that retirement age a little bit and give people enough warning. Remember, shared sacrifice, not just you getting affected, everybody. And then the third, those that are getting benefits from Social Security. Now, that's the one we have to be the most careful of, because 35% of seniors get 90% of their income from Social Security. So we have to be very careful there. So we need to look at those things, what they're getting in the future, the COLA amount, cost of living adjustments, that needs to have a little adjustment to bring in some savings. So if we look at shared sacrifice for all 3, that's going to be what it's going to take. And if we did that, we could get it done tonight. Now, in the area of Medicare, that's the toughest question, really, of the night. It really is. And here's the situation with Medicare. And let me just give a little background. Medicare, you can talk about different ways. The Medicare Trust Fund, that's just Medicare A, okay? Medicare B and D, That's kind of off on its own, not part of traditional Medicare trust fund. Medicare Part A, that has, I think the best way to say that, it has a finite amount of money coming in, and you could almost say it has almost an infinite amount of benefits going out. Secondly, in the area of B and D, 75% of that is come out of the general fund. That means children and grandchildren eventually could pay for that.
2 minutes on what would you do about Social Security and Medicare with regard to the deficit. Mr. Demmer.
Well, first of all, when you talk about Social Security, Steve is right. There are different people affected in different ways by our Social Security system. The one thing that I would definitely never do is take away the Social Security benefits that my parents, my in-laws, and other people that are disabled that depend on. That's the one thing that we as society would agree 100% that we will not do. Now, talk about false advertising. Congressman Walz and his group has been saying, Demmer says privatize. Listen to the ad. Because after how many weeks of running, they finally put it on their website. Listen to the ad. See who talks about privatizing. It is not Representative Demmer. There is nothing that I say in there, and there's nothing I have said about privatizing Social Security. It's deception, it's misleading, and it's dishonest. Because it's the last thing that I would ever do is pull Social Security benefits away from people who deserve and need to have that care. They paid in all those years. Now, having said that, there is no Social Security fund because that money's been squandered a long time ago. We have money coming in from people currently working that are taking care of the people getting these benefits. Do we have to look at solutions going forward? Absolutely we do. On a bipartisan basis, in a non-political way, this is a very important issue, not something to be trying to use for political gain and political advantage. I would sit down, I would work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and say, what can we do to make something that's going to work, something that we know we can count on that can be sustainable in the long term. That's what we can do for the seniors of today and the seniors of tomorrow, because there's going to be way more of us seniors than there is people paying in, and it does have to be fixed. But trying to use it as political gain by using false innuendo is not what we should be doing with Social Security.
And a 2-minute response from Mr. Walz.
Well, Social Security it's absolutely critical. It's the greatest anti-poverty program the world's ever seen. There's not a person in here who hasn't been affected by it, myself included. I think of the wisdom that went into putting that. When my father died after a long battle with cancer, I'm just out of high school. I got a young brother in 3rd grade and a stay-at-home mother. Social Security survivor benefits that were there to make sure that we had the bootstraps that we could pull ourselves up by. They were loaned to us by Social Security. It's a smart program. Representative Denver doesn't understand the program. He talks to you that's not there, doesn't work or whatever. Social Security is, as Steve Wilson said, who has very good ideas on Social Security. He's thought about it, he's being honest about it, and he's laid out a plan that I think is very similar to the approach that I would take in working with them on that. As far as Representative Demmer, this is what you get tired of. It's the talking points coming from Washington. Just for my campaign chair sitting in this room, a small business owner from here who started the softball program in Mankato. His campaign chair is a super lobbyist for ExxonMobil and Goldman Sachs. Where do you think you're going to get your ideas from? What do you think is going to happen? As far as this privatization, the Post-Bulletin put it out. The ad is absolutely accurate. Randy's now backtracking from it because it's a horrible idea to partially privatize Social Security. He says it's partial privatization. It's like being partially pregnant. We know that destroys the system. It's not where it's going to go. It's trying to move us away from it and trying to take that out. As far as Medicare goes, Steve is absolutely right. I believe we can never get a handle on the national debt. We can never be competitive with the rest of the world unless we get a handle on Medicare, because it drives the cost for the rest of the healthcare field. And the best way to get it done, whether it would be AARP, Consumer Reports, the expert in the state and Senator Dave Durenberger, the Republican expert, the folks at the Mayo Clinic, was to get the value-based provisions in there that was championed by me, that were put in there and are shown to be the way that we can get costs down. Once Medicare starts to get those costs, once we start to see us actually paying for value the way the system should work, instead of skimming off hundreds of billions to the insurance industry, we'll start to see real progress, and that's the direction we need to go.
All right, we go to a 1-minute follow-up on the issues of Social Security and Medicare. And Stephen Wilson gets the first follow-up.
Well, there's been discussion about ads, and my TV ads started today in Mankato, and so I would encourage you to watch for them. If you don't, you can see them on our website at stephenwilson.org. But they're family-friendly. They don't start arguments, and you'll feel good when you get done watching them. So we can do this. And in terms of both sides of the aisle, I think that is a good approach that Randy brought up. And matter of fact, that's what I have already done. Not what I'm going to do in the future, but what I've already demonstrated. Please note that my best witness for my qualifications as a candidate is not what I'm going to do or what I'm saying, but what my actions are representing. Not by my advertising campaign, not by what I'm saying, but please watch my actions. That's what I encourage you to look for as you compare the candidates.
A 1-minute follow-up on Social Security and Medicare from Randy Demmer.
Thank you. Well, again, first of all, my campaign manager is the son of a dairy farmer in the 1st District, and I am a business owner myself for 30-plus years. I don't have to look to other people to find out what it is like running a business and what business owners would do. And I provided insurance care for my employees because I chose to do that for the years that I was in business. So you don't have to talk to me about whether it's something I would do or not. I've done it. I don't have to talk to other people about what that's like. That's the sort of representation we're looking for in this district. Medicare, cutting $500 billion out of Medicare, as you did in this health care bill, Congressman, is simply wrong. It's not the right thing to do, and people know that. And when it comes to fixing Social Security, we need to have a bipartisan approach. We need to work on things that are real solutions, not going around trying to frighten senior citizens into trying to vote for me because I'm going to say things that I think will get them to be scared. It's not the right thing to do. It's not what I will do, and I will do what I've done in St. Paul and go and work to get these solutions done and not use the politics of fear to get elected.
And a 1-minute follow-up on Social Security and Medicare from Tim Walz.
Yeah, we know the folks that are supporting your campaign like Karl Rove would never use fear, that's for sure. Well, Randy's position on this is because the business, although I have had and ran the nonprofit with an S-Corp or whatever, but by that logic, Randy, you know nothing about education because you've never taught. You certainly know nothing about defending this nation because you've never wore its uniform. You certainly know nothing about what it takes to be a worker because you've never applied for a job. You said workers who were unemployed were simply lazy. Giving them unemployment insurance is keeping them from finding a job. So if we're going to go down that road, yes, I do have a diverse life experience from you, and it's one based on what most Americans have. This issue of Social Security can be fixed. It can be fixed with these common sense solutions. You've sat in the State House. How can you be an elected official for 20 years and not come to this forum tonight and tell them what you have done, as Steve is asking? I'll tell you what I've done for veterans. I'll tell you what I did on health care. I'll tell you what I did for transportation, and I'm proud to say that. Not a single word. Spending a lot of time focusing on me, I think there ought to be at least something there to focus on the things you've accomplished. And I don't see it being bipartisan-wise, and as I said the other day, maybe the center looks like the left from where you're at. I'm not sure.
Okay, the next area of questions focuses on foreign policy, and Mr. Walz goes first on this one. If you could advise the President on what needs to be different about our policy in Afghanistan, what would you tell him? Is the 30,000 troop surge working? Mr. Walz, 2 minutes.
Well, it's not a hypothetical for me. I've done that. I have been doing the job that we were told for the first 6 years of the Bush administration. Don't question authority. Support the troops. Anybody who questioned whether we should be in Iraq or we should be doing these things was labeled as un-American or unpatriotic. I questioned that administration, and I am questioning this administration. National policy and national security is the #1 responsibility of a member of Congress. Having understanding of world affairs, having understanding of the multifaceted aspects from economic development to national energy security. It makes absolutely no sense that we put our national energy security and this nation's national security in the hands of other countries. $1 billion a day to countries that hate us. They'll hate us for free. And when we talk about Afghanistan and moving forward on this, those are the folks that attacked us on 9/11. There is a threat from the extremism that's there. This nation does make sure that we need to get on that. The war in Iraq was a war of choice that diverted us from where we needed to be. The war in Afghanistan, here's what I would tell the President. First and foremost, we have to understand we can't fix the Iraqis' problems. Hamid Karzai and his people are going to have to fix this. This has been going on for many, many generations, and they're ingrained. What we can do is provide a stable, atmosphere in the area of making sure the Karzai government can move forward, making sure the real problem, which is in Pakistan, is isolated and kept in, and then making sure we're smart on how we do things, making sure that we're building friendships around the world instead of more enemies, realizing that al-Qaeda can leave Afghanistan at any time and establish bases in Somalia or Mali, but they can't do that if our policies are working for a more stable future, working as cooperative, not being belligerent and being out there, but having good national security, and then focusing on, with Afghanistan, making sure that the Afghan people take responsibility. I think today's good first step with Karzai talking to the Taliban, trying to understand civil wars, with maybe the exception of our own, are almost always decided with some type of compromise between them. We still have a mentality that we're going to end this thing and there's going to be a clear-cut division. Our soldiers will do whatever's asked of them. We have a responsibility as citizens to give them a mission that can succeed and to secure this country.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Wilson, 2 minutes.
Well, just real quick, a little bit about my background. I came back from Iraq a year ago last April, and I have tremendous respect for the service record of Congressman Walz, certainly respect for the service that Randy's father put in World War II. In my family, my father served during the World War II, during that time. I have a brother that served in Vietnam and has issues with Agent Orange. And myself, I spent a year in Iraq as a civilian. I was a United States diplomat embedded in the 4th Brigade Combat Team of the 3rd Infantry Division, and I was the economic team leader of the Provincial Reconstruction at Forward Operating Base Kalsu. So in terms of the foreign relations and foreign policy, this is something that's very fresh in my mind and something I'm very passionate about. What would I say to President Obama? What I would say is you've made a declaration to the Afghanis that you are going to start leaving in July of next year, 2011. You need to do something. I realize that the terms are condition-based, and I support that. But there has to be something that is done on that month now that that commitment is made, and here's why. Part of this war is finding out who are the bad people, and then taking the 90% that are not so bad and figuring out how we can work out a deal, and taking the 10% that are really bad and, sorry to say war strategy, but eliminating them. So the 90%, they have families that are in Afghanistan. We need to figure out how to win the hearts and minds of those families, because then they can help us to beat the 10% and eliminate the 10% that are really bad. That's generally the strategy going forward in these situations. So in order to win the hearts and minds and maintain the confidence of those 90% that aren't so bad, we need to follow through with what we say so that we can maintain that momentum going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Demmer, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, first of all, Congressman Walz and I have a lot to agree with in terms of these questions, in terms of this area of national security. I have said before, and I've said it in a big veterans rally on my behalf in Washington, I have extremely high expectations of my congressman when it comes to representing us in terms of our veterans and the people who are serving us both at home and abroad in the military. My father, a World War II veteran, my brother-in-law, a Vietnam veteran, my nephew, who's getting ready to be deployed to Afghanistan, a first lieutenant in the Army, my son-in-law is in the Navy. My brother-in-law served a year as a firefighter in Iraq. I understand the sacrifices that are being made by families all over. It is serious to send one single human being into harm's way. Our nation's history is about people being willing to do that for the benefit of our freedom, for the willingness to go and step in harm's way and make sure that those who would do us harm are held at bay. What I would tell the president is I would say thank you for standing strong in Afghanistan. Thank you for not setting an absolute timeline. I think that would be a big mistake. Thank you for listening to your military advisors. And continue working with the congressman and continue working with the Congress and the Senate in a nonpartisan way that does not politicize the men and the women that we have fighting in their lives. And the idea that Democrats or Republicans have a corner on caring about our soldiers is simply not right. Because I think on a bipartisan basis, we can find and we can work together for the benefit of this country and the men and women who are fighting for us. And that's what I would tell the president.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Mr. Walz, you have 1 minute. Response?
Well, this issue on care for veterans, from Washington's second inaugural or Lincoln's second inaugural on caring for those who bore the battle has always been there. But there's not a politician alive who hasn't stood in front of veterans. It's a rare one that stands behind them and gets things done. And I think what you're hearing is, and I agree with Randy on this, but the issue is that I'm effective and can get it done. Whether it be AMVETS, who said that I am the most effective representative, American veterans, most effective representative for this district, for this country that we've seen in 25 years. That's reflective of you. I haven't just talked the talk, I've got it done. We now have the greatest care at the VA hospital. We have access back to veterans who were kicked off on this. We're fighting a war and went to war that they told us would last weeks, not months. It would be paid for by the oil, and we didn't have to budget. You know what they did? They cut the VA budget and knocked off Priority 8 veterans. Those days are over, because you know what? It's just stand in front of people, tell them the platitudes or whatever. Go look at the record on who's delivering on veterans. I stand with you on this one, and I agree with Randy on this. That's got to be part of the decision on war. So does the cost that added to the debt.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Wilson, 1 minute.
Well, I agree to many of the things that have been said. I agree with the framework that Congressman Walz put forth in terms of the expectations. That's very important. When I spent time in Iraq, Iraq was generally 40 to 50 years behind America. Afghanistan, I haven't been there, but what I understand from the colleagues that have been there is that many areas are 400 to 500 years behind us. So we have to be careful what our expectations are over there. And in terms of supporting our troops, I did dozens of trips out into the red zone to talk to factory owners, to figure out how to create jobs for those people that were on the line, that weren't so bad, but if we put them to work, they would stop shooting at our military. That was my job, is to go out in the red zone and talk to those factory owners and figure out how to get that done. Okay? On all those trips, those dozens of missions of trips out into the red zone, the military was there to cover my back. And I will guarantee you that it's my turn to cover their back if I'm given the opportunity to be in Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Demmer, 1 minute.
Well, thank you. You know, when I was serving in the legislature in my second term, I served on a committee called Government Operations and Veterans Affairs. This is about 4 years ago, 6 years ago, when I served in that, in my second and third years in my term. This was when we had lots of changes going on. Our military was different. We had lots of people leaving their homes, leaving their businesses to go off and serve. It was a different military. On a bipartisan basis, in that committee, we ramped up the funding to help get veteran services officers in every single county to make sure that veterans knew the kind of benefits they should have. We made sure that we had representation in our colleges and our universities to make sure that veterans and their families knew what kind of benefits they would be able to get. We invested in the veterans' homes. We made sure we helped clean things up that were going wrong there. We invested to make sure they had better facilities, better doctors. Nonpartisan, never any issues of discussion other than what's the right thing to do. And that's what we need to do in Congress as we work to make the situation for our military men and women the best it can be.
Debate Minnesota intends to include the audience in all of its forums, and we're going to move now to some questions from the audience. Joe and I have had a chance to look at these, and they're all very, very stimulating. Unfortunately, we have to, he's the editor of the Free Press, we have to edit these and get only a very few, but we're going to try to get as many as we can in the final 25 minutes of this evening's debate. The first question that we have taken from the audience comes from Dolores in Vernon Center. And Dolores asks, and I believe Steve Wilson will go first on this, and a 1-minute response, please, to each of these so that we can get in as many as possible. Besides the war, what do you see as the most important thing that we need to address, and why? Stephen Wilson.
Besides the war, I would say the national debt, because they are, in fact, somewhat related. Right now, we think about this idea that we've got $1 trillion that every year that we're borrowing new money, and it's really closer to $2 trillion. Let's just say $1 trillion. How much do we refinance every year? Anybody know? It's quite a bit. If you add what we refinance and our new debt together, it runs about $122 billion a week. A week. You multiply that times 50 weeks, that's about $6 trillion. That's about 40% of our total debt. And the challenge that we're having now is that it's not just about the amount of debt, but who's lending that money to us. 50% is coming from foreign sources. This, and I want to be really careful to say this, but this could have the potential to be somewhat similar to a Cold War for our children because of the amount of money that is being lent to us from foreign sources.
Randy Demmer.
I think the most important issue facing us is the runaway and careless spending that we have in this country that is resulting in the massive buildup in debt that we have that is actually burdening our employers, burdening us as citizens, and virtually paralyzing this country as we go forward. Again, the idea that we could spend ourselves to prosperity, that we can take $787 billion of borrowing and say that that is somehow going to drive prosperity, going to drive innovation, is simply not right. We have to prioritize national defense, national security, infrastructure, public safety, things such as the people who truly cannot help themselves. Those should be our priorities. Those are our priorities as individual people, and we should be a reflection of that in our government. And it should not be about government taking total control and trying to spend our way to prosperity, because those who have the purses have the control.
Tim Walz.
I would say economy and the jobs. Steve is right on this one. We need to move. We need to get that. But I think we need to be very clear about this. The stimulus Randy's talking about is, and when you talk about spending, it's not about big government versus small government. It's about effective government and prioritizing. Which part of the stimulus would you have taken back? Would you have taken the tax cuts to every single person in this room? Well, there's one or two of us that might not have got it in here, but the vast majority did get that tax cut that went to there. Would you take back the money we put into veterans to beef it up where there was no planning went into this war and our veterans came back with TBI? What we need to do, and I have a plan, and I agree with Steve on this. He puts it on his website, so do I. What we need to do is get our tax policies right, providing tax credits for the 98% of businesses and the real people that get out there and create jobs, R&D. We need to invest in infrastructure. We're spending 1% of GDP in this country while China spends 9%. We can do better. And then we need to get control of our energy needs and quit being at the mercy of, and again, I said your campaign chair the last time, who is from Virginia, who is the lobbyist for ExxonMobil. That's the energy policy. That's where the problems with this economy comes from. Create new green energy jobs, grow the pie bigger, and everyone will prosper. That's the direction we need to go.
Thanks. No clapping, please. Thanks. Next audience question from Dave in Mankato. On negative campaigning, will your campaign use ads addressing your opponent's faults or your strengths? I believe you get the first crack at this one, Mr. Walz. 1 minute.
My first ad featured Mike Troke and the work we did. This is a great story. 4 gentlemen down in southeast Minnesota, all about the same age. Only thing they had in common was they served in Minnesota. They found out they served in Vietnam, and they were from Minnesota. The second thing they found out in common, they all got Parkinson's disease. What we did was come together, tell the VA and the American public, we owe it to these gentlemen to get them the right care. I ran that ad, and Mike Troke said the right thing. It's always the right time. You have the opportunity to do the right thing. We did it. I ran a second one on stopping outsourcing of jobs, making sure that what we've seen is an advocation of, here's all we have to do to fix the economy. Cut tax rates down to zero, allow companies to trade overseas without anything in the middle, and then get rid of all these excessive regulations. If that's the plan, Randy, why don't we just go to zero tax rate and put our children back to work? We'll be hugely profitable if that's the way we're going to go. That's not the way you fix the economy, so that's what we can move forward. My ads have shown that. I did address what I think is a reckless policy of the idea of privatizing Social Security and undermining that safety net, and I think that contrast ad is fair to run.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Wilson, 1 minute.
Well, this might be a point where you'll hear some difference between the candidates up here again. Not that that's happened before tonight, has it? The issue relative to the campaign ads, I really would say that I'm the only candidate, and I'll stand by that does not use any negative campaign ads. And again, you can look at them on my website. You can make your own judgment. And they're running in Mankato and Rochester right now. If you look at my first campaign ad, and being genuine is so important to me, and being authentic. My first campaign ad, the first person that's on there is someone who's standing in front of their own house because they're working on their own construction project. The second one is a lady and her husband who's standing on her father's farm. The third one is a couple that are standing in front of her car. The next one is a lady that's at her house. Okay? That's how genuine and careful we are with our ads, because we really want to tell the truth and be as genuine as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Demmer, 1 minute.
Well, when it comes to the campaign ads, it's about making sure you're telling the truth, and make sure it's about votes. Congressman Walz talks about the privatization ad that he ran. Look at it. Where did I say anything about that? It's blatantly false. It's innuendo. It's not right. Look at the ads that I've run. They're about votes. They're about votes that Congressman Walz took, and they are about what I believe is wrong about those votes. The $787 billion stimulus plan that he knows not what's in it. The cap and trade tax that's going to cost every man, woman, and child, on average, $150 a month in additional energy costs and decimate agriculture and other businesses relying on energy. And it's about the health care takeover that a lot of people just do not appreciate, do not like, because we can take care of our own health care. Those ads are about those votes. And those votes were taken on behalf of us. People can choose if they think those are good votes or not votes. But that's what those ads are about. And there is nothing in there that's not true about those.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer.
The next audience question is a question on foreign policy. It comes from Fred in Mankato. What is your position on the peace talks between Israel and Palestine, and how does that relate to the problems with Iran? And I believe, Mr. Demmer, you have the first response on that. 1 minute, please.
Peace talks between Israel and Palestine have been going on for probably 1,000 years. I don't know, a long, long time. As somebody who supports the right of Israel to have a free country, as somebody who supports the right of them to exist, I think it's very important that we make sure we do not set up an ally for failure. I would like to see them continue to talk. I would like to see them trade if possible. Because I believe that trade is something that brings countries together. If you are trading, if you are doing things in the course of business together, you might have differences in terms of competition and that sort of thing, but it makes it more difficult to fight. But what I would say is we have to make sure that we stand with the best ally we have in the Middle East, that's Israel, and make sure they aren't put at a disadvantage by people who still, to my understanding, have not recognized their right to exist. So I'd like to see them continue to talk. We have to make sure that we back our partner.
Your position on the peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians, how does that relate to the problems with Iran? Steve Wilson.
Well, as Randy said, we've been doing this for a long time with Israel and Palestine. Probably not 1,000 years. But
Seems like it.
certainly a couple, 3 decades, perhaps. The two-state solution is something that has come about, and of course, George W. Bush really worked hard at trying to get that done in the last year of his 8 years. We're back at the table again with trying to come up with a two-state solution. And I've really given this some thought, and I'm thinking that I would support the idea that if we decided to step back in a year, if this didn't work this time, to really focus our energy on something else for a while, because it really takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to fix the world. I've been in the Middle East, I've worked over there, I know it. And so if the timing isn't right, let it go for a little while.
And 1 minute for Tim Walz.
Well, I agree with Steve of trying to, having construction projects in Iraq and Afghanistan when we can't build Highway 14. That is troubling. But I also believe this issue of the two-state solution with Israel and Palestine is central to many of the problems that emanate out of the Middle East. I think we need to get a solution there to stabilize the entire region. In traveling there and being in the West Bank and seeing, we got General Dayton there. This is smart policy. We don't have hundreds of thousands of troops there. What we have is several hundred working and training and verifying Palestinians who want to make sure they can protect the West Bank and making sure Israel feels comfortable with this. I agree. Israel's a good ally. I support their policies based on democracy and freedom of speech and those things. But we also have to realize the situation in Gaza and the situation in the West Bank has to be brought to a conclusion. The vast majority of people in this world simply want to live peacefully, raise their children, be safe. We need to, if we can help facilitate that, we take some of the sting out. We isolate people like Ahmadinejad. And when I went to Damascus to meet with President Assad, I made it clear to him, you can choose to go with the folks who are right on our side and with Israel, or you can choose to go to Iraq. We need to start making them make those choices.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Next audience question, Mr. Wilson, it goes to you first. It's from Robert Mankato. What do you think of the cap and trade bill and its impact on taxes and energy prices?
All right, thank you, Robert. What is my view on cap and trade? I do not support that because the total focus is on carbon emissions, okay? And I believe that that's an important issue, but I do not believe it should be the main focus of energy policy going forward. It can be a part of it, but the main focus of energy policy should be energy independence. That's what we need to be focused on. And then carbon emissions can be part of that in some way. Conservation can be part of that. So that's why if we change that vision and say, okay, energy independence is what we're after, now we know that we can create a lot of jobs with that by reducing the amount of Middle Eastern oil that we import into the United States and eliminating it by a certain year. Now we know that we can not only create those jobs, but develop the economy in such a way that investment capital will be made into domestic energy here in the United States. Conservation, yes, will be part of that. And innovation will be part of that. That's what we need to be focused on.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Demmer, 1 minute.
Well, I think the cap and trade bill that Congressman Walz and this Congress supported is absolutely devastating to agriculture. Statistics show that by the year, I believe it's by the year 2020, we'd see $5 billion reduction. That's with a B, $5 billion reduction in income to the industry of agriculture in this country. We would also see, if this were to be put in place, a 17% reduction in cropland acres for the benefit of trees. I like trees, but we are in a time when we need to expand food production, not contract it. And the other thing I'd have to point out is at a tremendous cost. I believe it's the U.S. Department of Energy estimated that this would cost average family, regular families, including seniors on fixed incomes, another $150 per month in energy costs. That was their estimate. And also, if we want to talk about the growth of agriculture, the growth of the most important industry in our entire state, to put such a policy in place that, oh, I'm sorry, stop.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Mr. Walz, your turn. 1
Clearest
minute.
cut example of talking points provided by national Republicans versus the reality in your life. This bill never left. It was energy policy moving forward. I absolutely believe we have to get away from that. $1 billion a day entanglement in foreign wars and those types of things. But all you have to do is look around. From Friday to today, gas went up 12 cents, all of it to countries that hate us. We're sitting right in an institution where the state cut back funding to IREDI to move forward on energy independence. This nation, from a national security perspective, can create jobs here, can go forward. The statistics Mr. Demmer's giving were sponsored and paid for by the oil industry. The only group that denies there's any negative impact, the petroleum engineers of all the scientific groups in the world that deny it's an impact. But here's the thing. I don't care whether you believe in global warming. What you need to know is energy prices are still going to go up. That's going to be an impact. There is not a single agricultural group that supports my opponent's campaign. They support mine because they know this is moving forward, this is containing energy costs, this is American jobs, and this is getting away from the failed policies that got us into the mess on oil dependence. So,
Thank you, Mr. Walz.
And thank you for all of your very thoughtful questions. I'm sorry that we can't get to all of them. We'd probably be here past the end of the Vikings game if we got to all of them. But I guess for the last question here, we'll go to a very local issue, the Highway 14 issue, phrased in this way, 40 years and still not complete. What would you do to get the 4-lane complete?
Do I need help? Who do I go to first?
Mr. Walz, I have on my list.
Again, clear example of this. I said on the House Transportation Bill, I've advocated for this. I was the one who changed the process of, I think it's absolutely right for local officials to be able to request federal funding. Those who demonize earmarks and things like that, that's money that doesn't add to the debt. It's money that's going to be spent by bureaucrats. I've advocated for Highway 14. We had an opportunity here to move a bill forward. Governor Paulini chose to try and stop it. He tried to veto a piece of legislation. Mr. Demmer voted against the transportation bill. He voted to not override the veto. That's not going to make sure that zero money goes to Highway 14. There's not a person in here who hasn't lost somebody on Highway 14. Here's the issue again on spending. If we don't spend a dime on transportation, nothing, don't spend a dime, don't go to Washington and spend a dime on transportation, it will cost this nation $80 billion in idling tax by being caught in congestion, by roads that are too small, by not moving things forward. I will continue to push for that. We need a reauthorization of the surface transportation bill. We need to make sure that while China is building, we're patching. That's got to end. That's the way, and when people talk about it's the spending, it's not the spending, it's spending it wrong. It's spending it in the right place as investments, and transportation is the best one.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Mr. Wilson.
Well, infrastructure certainly is very, very important. I'm a big proponent of infrastructure. I love economic development. That's what I've been doing for 20 years. I certainly understand the importance of having a strong infrastructure. That should be one of the first places our money goes after providing for the defense, because that can provide for our economy. However, we are in a corner right now, so we've got to figure out how to get these things paid for, because yes, there would be an idling issue, but unless we figure out how to balance our own checkbook, our economy will be sitting idle, and we've got to get that piece figured out. So that means we've got to find some way to pay for these things and get them accomplished at the same time. And that means it's going to take courage to go to Washington and balance that checkbook and be able to say yes to the things that need to be said yes to and no to the things that can wait until tomorrow. And infrastructure needs to be right behind defense.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Demmer, 1 minute on Highway 14.
I agree with Steve that infrastructure is one of the most important things that we have in government. That's something that we do. That's something that we get together for in something called government to put together. Public safety, national security, and a system of transportation, a system of infrastructure. Yes, I did vote against that transportation bill. That's because I read it. Congressman, I read the bill. I knew it was in it. That's why I voted against it. Because I voted against that bill because, number one, it directed more money to Twin Cities, not to my district. I've got 60% of the roads and the bridges in the state of Minnesota and southeast Minnesota. This took the MVES, the motor vehicle sales tax, and directed 50% of it to go to transit instead of to roads and bridges. I didn't agree with that. It also directed that we would not ever be able to do a toll road. Now, I don't know if I want to do toll roads or not, but I don't think we should take things off the table. That's, again, about something going toward a way to finance roads. I don't know if we should do toll roads, but it took it off the table because that's what the metro area wanted. This is about establishing priorities. Roads and bridges are the most important priorities we have in the state, and that's where our dollars should be going instead of some of these other projects.
Thank you, Mr. Demmer. Pete, I think we'll move to closing statements now.
We now will move to the closing statements. Each candidate will get 1 minute for a closing statement, and we begin with Randy Demmer.
Well, thank you. Thanks again to Debate Minnesota. Thank you very much to Minnesota State University Mankato for hosting this. And most of all, thank to all of you for being here. This is the kind of discourse we need to have. We need a respectful discussion. I've been doing this in the legislature for 8 years, and I was on the school board for 10 years. We need this kind of discussion because we need to see the vast differences there are in the direction we want to go in this country. A very clear choice. Congressman Walz is voting 94% plus of the time with the most liberal speaker in the history of our nation. There's nothing centrist about that. It is pure one direction. And they're taking this country toward bigger government, more controls, taking away our liberties in the form of stimulus bills that are, we don't even know where it's going, cap and trade that are going to tax us out of our minds, and of course a health care takeover that takes away our right to make personal decisions about our health care. It's not wrong. We have a decision to make. It's very clear. I think Congressman Walz deserves to be replaced. I humbly ask for your support.
A 1 minute closing statement for Stephen Wilson.
All right. Let's go, huh? Let's imagine you're employers. Everyone in this room is an employer. All right? You're going to hire somebody tomorrow. What would happen if that person came in and spent $1 million to $2 million to get that job? Wouldn't that say something that just registered a question mark in your mind? What is that? How many promises did you have to make to get that money raised? What, the second thing is you said, well, what kind of marketing plan does this potential employee have for you? And they came to you and said, well, my main piece is going to be to negate the competition. You heard it tonight. I'm not making that up, am I? That's the main piece. You're going, oh, well, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, what kind of business plan do you have put together? And they really don't have a business plan. They maybe have 1 or 2 ideas sketched down. But what if somebody said, I've only spent 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, $100,000, and I've got a business plan to move your business forward?
And a 1-minute closing statement to Tim Walz.
Again, thank you, too. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Great to be here. I look out, Glenn, I taught your daughter in school. I taught with you and had great arguments side by side. Scott, we worked on filling food banks together. Some of you, I coached your kids in football. I had them in my National Guard unit. This is the face they want to paint on you, something national, of something that I'm wishing I'm kind of with Steve on this. The idea, they rank every member of Congress on their net wealth. I rank at the bottom. Imagine that as a school teacher on this. You know what I wish they'd make us do? I wish they'd make us wear NASCAR suits. So you'd have to wear who's supporting you. VFW, NRA, police officers and things like that. ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, those types of things. Steve Wilson, his wife, many others. So whatever it be. So that would be the thing. But put that out there. We can solve these problems. We can do it together. This rhetoric and this nationalization and demonization, you know how I act. You've seen me around here. You know how effective I am. I'd like to get the chance for 2 more years. Thank you all for coming.
That concludes tonight's debate. Tonight's debate was made possible through the financial support of the Otto Bremer Foundation, Best Buy, Target Corporation, and Blandin Foundation. We want to thank Minnesota State Mankato and the student government for hosting Debate Minnesota tonight. And special thanks to Pioneer Public Television, KS Television, and Minnesota Public Radio for broadcasting tonight's debate, and The Uptake, which live streamed the debate online. Thanks to Marissa for keeping time, and to all other television, radio, print media, as well as all the bloggers and Twitterers in the audience. Most importantly, thanks to all of you for coming, listening, and watching through live streaming wherever you might be. Thank you, and good night.